Welcome to another episode of Who's There? Horror Stories and Reports, where shadows come alive and the whispers in the walls have much to tell. In today's episode, we'll explore accounts that have reached us through those who dared to face the unknown. Stories of inexplicable encounters, presences that defy logic, and moments when the line between our world and something beyond simply vanished. And as we always say here on the channel, sometimes it's better not to answer when someone or something asks, "Who's there?" I was never one to believe in local stories. I always thought those ancient tales that people tell in small towns serve more to maintain tradition than to actually scare anyone. But what happened to me in Saltillo has no explanation. I went there as a meteorologist, hired by a university to analyze the fog patterns that form in the early mornings. The city is small, surrounded by hills and forests, and has a constant humidity that creates that heavy fog effect in the early hours of the day. That was all I needed to study. At least, that's what I thought. On the first morning, I climbed to a higher point with my equipment to try to capture the density of the fog and record some thermal images. It was still dark. The sky hadn't even begun to lighten. The fog came in thick, like a white wall swallowing everything in its path. The strange thing was noticing the silence. No birds, no wind through the trees, no sound at all. Just that white mass covering everything. And then I felt as if someone was there with me. I didn't see anything immediately, but you know when you feel you're not alone. Like there's a presence behind you, standing, just watching. I looked back, and of course there was nothing. But a chill ran up my spine, and it wasn't from the weather. The measurements from that day all came out distorted. The temperature wasn't compatible with previous data from the region. The humidity level fluctuated without sense, and there was strange interference in the sensors. I tried to adjust the devices, but nothing worked properly. I returned to my lodging frustrated, thinking that maybe I had made some mistake or the equipment was defective, except that the next day, the same thing happened. And again the feeling of being watched. I spoke with a kind lady from the town who sold homemade bread in the plaza. When I casually mentioned that I was studying the fog, her face changed. She became serious. She didn't respond immediately, but later spoke softly, almost whispering that there are things that don't want to be measured, that the fog in Saltillo wasn't just water in the air. I felt uncomfortable, thought it was exaggeration, superstition, but it stuck in my head. On the third day, I decided to go even earlier, around 4 in the morning. I climbed up alone again, equipment in my backpack, flashlight in hand. As soon as I reached the observation point, I noticed that the fog had already covered everything. You couldn't even see your own feet. I set up the equipment in the darkness, with that weak flashlight light trembling in my hand. That's when I heard footsteps. It wasn't an animal. It was a person. But the sound was muffled, as if the steps were being dragged. I turned the flashlight in all directions, but all I saw was white. And suddenly, among the patches of fog, I saw a silhouette, standing, tall, still. It wore something like a hood, but it was impossible to see the face. The thing simply stood there, motionless, as if it were waiting for me. I tried to say something, but my throat locked up. It was as if the air had become denser, harder to breathe. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, in the middle of the fog, as if it were part of it. For a second, I thought it could be someone from the town, some curious person, I don't know. But time passed, and nothing. Just that standing presence, making me feel smaller with each second. I took a step back, tripped over a branch, and fell. When I got up and pointed the flashlight again, it was no longer there. It disappeared, just like that. But the feeling that something was still nearby didn't go away. On the contrary, it became even stronger. At that moment, the fog began to move in a strange way. It wasn't the wind. It was as if it were molding itself around me, as if it were enclosing me in a circle. The equipment began to beep without sense, as if there was some very strong interference. I desperately grabbed everything and began to descend the hill blindly, trying to follow the path that I myself had marked on the GPS. Only the signal no longer worked. None of them. No compass, no GPS, no cell phone. Nothing. It was as if I had been taken out of reality for a few minutes. The path I knew so well seemed different. The trees were closer together, taller, with branches that seemed to move even without wind. I began to panic. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it was just the fog, that everything was distorted with that low visibility. But it didn't help. That place, it seemed like it was expelling me, or worse, pulling me in. I heard a voice. It wasn't clear. It was like a very muffled whisper, but one word could be understood. Stop. I ran. I don't know for how long. I only remember stumbling, falling, getting up, running again, until I came across a type of construction that, I swear to God, I had never seen there before. It was like an ancient chapel, made of stone, covered with moss, and practically swallowed by vegetation. The door was ajar, and in that state, it seemed like the only safe place. I entered. The smell was horrible, like wet wood mixed with rust. There were no benches, no altar, just an empty space with marks on the floor, as if someone had dragged something circular there several times. While I was trying to understand where I was, I heard footsteps again, this time inside the chapel. I felt my legs freeze. There was nowhere to hide. The figure appeared again, hooded, standing there at the entrance, but now it seemed bigger, more defined. It was impossible to see the face, but it had something in its hands, something that looked like a staff or crook. And when it took the first step inside, everything around began to vibrate, as if time were freezing. The sound of the wind, which before still existed outside, simply disappeared. It was as if I were trapped inside a moment that stretched forever. The walls of the chapel began to darken, as if the fog itself were infiltrating through the cracks in the stone. The figure walked slowly, each step resonating in a strange way, as if the floor had turned to metal or marble. I was no longer sure if that was really a chapel or some other place completely outside reality. I tried to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. I could only take 2 steps back before touching the back wall. That's when I noticed a mark there, carved into the stone, right behind me. A circle with symbols I had never seen in my life, but which gave me a horrible feeling. It pulsed as if it were alive. The figure stopped right in the center of the space. It knew I was there. I felt it, as if we were connected in some way. The thing turned its face in my direction, or at least, what appeared to be its face, and although I couldn't see the eyes, you could feel it was staring at me. Everything inside me screamed to run, but my body wouldn't obey. It was at that moment that the flashlight flickered and went out completely. The darkness was total for a few seconds. When the light returned, just for a fraction of a second, it was a few meters from me. The staff raised, and then it went out again. I can't explain what happened in the following minutes, or hours, or seconds. Time in there ceased to exist in a way I can't describe. I had the sensation of floating, trapped inside a place without sound, without light, without anything, but with it, always with it, nearby. I saw images. I don't know if they were visions, memories, or things it wanted to show me. People disappearing in the fog, people being pulled by arms that emerged from nowhere, others, like me, trying to study the region, and they all had the same end. They disappeared. It was as if it were warning me, or showing me what could happen. Suddenly, everything turned white again. That same initial fog, but now it seemed to have become part of me. I looked around and was outside the chapel on my knees in the middle of the path, the backpack beside me, the equipment thrown on the ground, all turned off. The clock showed 7 in the morning, as if everything had happened in a matter of minutes, but at the same time it seemed like I had been trapped there for an eternity. There was no sign of anything around. Not of the chapel, nor of the figure, nor of the strange distortion in the air, just the fog, dissipating little by little with the arrival of the sun. I returned to the lodging in a state of shock. I tried to tell a colleague who was helping me analyze the data, but everything seemed crazy. No one would believe any of this. But the worst came when I looked at the day's files. The thermal images captured a silhouette. It's not just me saying I saw something, it's there, standing motionless, standing in the fog while I adjusted the equipment. And the worst, there's more than one. 3 hooded figures in the background, scattered through the fog as if they were surrounding me. I don't know if it was at that same moment. I don't remember seeing more than one, but the camera caught them. After seeing those images, I left everything. I didn't touch the equipment again, nor did I review the data. I spent the rest of the day locked in my room at the lodging, with the windows closed, unable to sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that figure again, standing, waiting as if it were still there, in some corner of the city, just watching me. I began to feel that something inside me had changed. It was as if the fog had left a trace, something that remained trapped in me, a constant feeling of being watched even in broad daylight. I arrived home, tried to continue with my life, but since that day the fog doesn't leave me in peace. Every early morning between 4 and 5, a dense fog appears outside my window. I've lived in different places since then. I've tried changing cities, climates, even countries, but it always appears. I've measured it, recorded it, tried to ignore it, nothing works. And on some nights, when I look carefully, I see the same silhouette, sometimes close, sometimes more distant, but always standing, motionless, as if it were waiting for something. I could never work with field research again. I avoid any place that has fog or dense humidity. To this day, I don't know if all that was real, if it was some kind of mental collapse caused by stress. But there are things that have no explanation. There are days when I wake up with scratches on my arm or with the muffled sound of footsteps inside the house. No camera records anything, no equipment detects a presence, but I know it. He is still near. And the most bizarre thing of all, since that early morning in Saltillo, time never seemed to follow the correct rhythm again. Minutes that pass too slowly, hours that disappear without sense. As if I had brought a part of that distorted reality with me. At first I tried to find answers. I spoke with specialists in atmospheric phenomena, in psychological disorders, even with people who study the paranormal. Some said it was accumulated stress, others that I could have had some type of dissociative episode. Some even suggested that it could be exposure to natural gas or some element in the soil of Saltillo. But no explanation fit with everything that happened. No one could explain the mark on the glass, the images captured by the thermal cameras, or the real sensation of having been transported to another place. A sensation that wasn't just psychological, it was physical. Over time, I stopped trying to understand. I just wanted it to leave me in peace. I learned to live with that constant presence. I don't tell this to almost anyone. The few times I tried, they looked at me as if I were making it all up. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. And I know that somehow I wasn't the only one. From time to time, I investigate similar accounts, and it's terrifying how similar stories emerge. People who saw figures in the fog, who lost their sense, curved time, who had memory lapses in foggy places. It's never the same, but there's always something in common. As if it were part of something bigger, something that is dispersed but silent. There was one night when, on impulse, I decided to return to Saltillo. I didn't get to climb the hill. I just stopped at the entrance to the city, stayed a few minutes, in the car looking toward the road covered by fog. I couldn't get out. I was certain that if I entered again, I wouldn't leave anymore. It's hard to explain. That city has a weight in the air, as if it were always on the edge of something that no one wants to see. A kind of pact between the inhabitants and that place. They know it and they avoid talking about it, and whoever tries to understand too much disappears. The strangest thing is that after that attempt to return, the fog stopped. Not completely, but it began to come less frequently, as if the thing had felt that I respected the limit, that I understood the message. Even so, I still have days when I wake up in the middle of the night with the heavy air, the same feeling as before, as if time had stopped for a few seconds. In those hours I don't move. I stay lying down, breathing slowly, waiting for it to pass. And it always passes, out of nowhere, without warning, as if it had never happened. To this day I can't explain it. It doesn't make sense, but it can't be denied either. The only thing I can say with certainty is, if you're ever in Saltillo, and the fog begins to descend faster than normal, don't stand still, don't try to understand. Don't follow figures that seem to be calling you. And mainly, never enter where the fog is densest. Because maybe, just maybe, it won't let you. Out again. My name is Jorge Ramirez. I'm 37 years old, but this story happened almost a decade ago when I was 28. It was 2015, and the economy in our region was in the crapper. My brother Alejandro and I had been unemployed for almost 6 months when we found out that Autolux was hiring for their new plant in Derramadero. At that time, I was living in a tiny apartment with my wife, who was 5 months pregnant, and the bills were just piling up. Alejandro, 2 years younger than me, had just gotten divorced and was temporarily living on my couch. We barely spoke to each other since a stupid fight in our teens, but necessity brought us together again. I remember we did the interviews together, nervous as 2 kids. By some miracle, they hired us on the same day. Me for the logistics area, operating forklifts, and Alejandro for machine maintenance. The factory was enormous, an industrial complex that occupied almost a square kilometer, with several interconnected buildings. The oldest was the stamping sector, which according to what they told us had a different history from the other pavilions, but no one went into details. In the first few days, everything seemed normal, even exciting. The pay was good, there was growth potential, and I could finally give a decent life to my child on the way. But soon we began to notice something strange in the behavior of the older employees, especially those who worked the night shift. They exchanged glances when certain topics came up and avoided certain hallways in the stamping sector, especially after midnight. During breaks, I heard hushed conversations that ceased when I approached. Once, when I was filling my bottle at the water fountain, I heard a guy named Ernesto say, "She appeared again yesterday near the hydraulic press." When I asked who they were talking about, the silence was immediate and uncomfortable. Ernesto, an operator who had been at the factory for 5 years, looked at me in a strange way, as if he were deciding if I was worthy of trust. After a few seconds, he just said, "Don't walk alone through hallway 7B after midnight," and returned to his post, leaving me with a strange feeling in the pit of my stomach. Alejandro and I began working different shifts, me at night and him in the morning. This meant we hardly saw each other, except during shift changes. It was during one of those changes, after 2 weeks working there, that I noticed something different about my brother. He was pale, with deep circles under his eyes, as if he hadn't slept in days. When I asked what was going on, he evaded the question, said it was just fatigue, but I knew my brother too well to believe him. There was something in his gaze, a type of fear I had never seen before. That night, during my shift, I decided to investigate this hallway 7B that everyone seemed to avoid. It was a narrow passage between the stamping sector and the metal sheet warehouse, poorly lit by some fluorescent lamps that flickered irregularly. The concrete floor had dark stains that looked like oil, but which formed strange patterns, almost like small footprints. The air there was also different, colder, with a sweet smell reminiscent of wet earth. As I walked slowly down the hallway, I felt as if someone was watching me. I turned around several times, but the hallway was empty. Only the hum of machines in the distance and the occasional metallic creaking of the building's structure broke the silence. The following week, Alejandro didn't show up for his shift. I received a call from Human Resources saying he had quit without notice. I tried calling him several times, but it only went to voicemail. When I got home, his things were gone. Just a hastily scribbled note. "I need to leave town for a while, don't ask why, and please, Jorge, quit that place." I was furious with him for abandoning me like that, but I was also worried. This wasn't typical of my brother. The next day I sought out Ernesto during the break and pressed him for answers. He looked around, making sure we were alone, and finally spoke. "Your brother saw her, the girl in the blue uniform." His voice was almost a whisper. "They say before the factory there was a school here, a rural elementary school, and during construction..." He stopped talking when another employee entered the room. He quickly got up, threw his half-finished coffee in the sink, and left without finishing the story. I tried to follow him, but he practically ran to his workstation, and I couldn't leave my area for long. With Alejandro's sudden departure, The company was short-staffed and I ended up being invited to work double shifts. I couldn't refuse. We needed the money, especially now that my wife had entered the third trimester of her pregnancy. The days transformed into an exhausting routine of work, micro-naps, and more work. It was during one of those endless nights, around 3 in the morning, that it all happened. I was operating the forklift alone in the warehouse adjacent to the stamping sector, moving pallets of metal parts. The place was huge, with corridors formed by steel shelving that almost reached the ceiling. The industrial lights cast strange shadows in the corners, and the echo of distant machines created an oppressive atmosphere. I remember I was fighting against sleep, humming softly to keep myself awake, when I saw something move in my peripheral vision at the end of the corridor, where I was. At first I thought it was another employee, maybe one of the guards making their rounds. But when I turned the forklift in that direction and turned on the headlight, I didn't see anyone. I continued my work, attributing it to fatigue and deceptive shadows. A few minutes later, while lifting a particularly heavy pallet, I heard a sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. A child's laugh, soft and distant, as if it came from behind the shelves. I placed the pallet on the ground and turned off the forklift's engine, trying to listen better. The silence that followed was absolute, almost supernatural. Not even the constant hum of the machines seemed to reach that place. "Is anyone there?" I called, my voice echoing among the metal shelves. No response. I got off the forklift and walked slowly down the corridor, my flashlight illuminating the path ahead. It was then that I noticed I was near the entrance to the famous hallway 7B, the one everyone avoided. Something told me to go back, to ignore what I had heard and continue my work, but curiosity was stronger. I entered hallway 7B with hesitant steps, the beam of my flashlight dancing on the peeling walls. The air seemed denser there, as if it were charged with something I couldn't name. As I advanced, I noticed that the stains on the floor I had seen before formed a path, as if someone with feet dirty with soil had walked through there. I followed those marks almost without thinking, hypnotized by the strangeness of the situation. The hallway made a sharp curve to the left, leading to an area I had never visited before, a small vestibule with several doors, all locked with rusty padlocks except one. That half-open door had a faded sign that could barely be read, Storage 3. The strangest thing is that, according to the factory map they showed us during training, that area shouldn't even exist. It was as if it had been forgotten during the remodeling, a vestige of the original building. I pushed the door slowly, and it opened with a sharp squeak that resonated through the empty vestibule. The interior was completely dark, and when I pointed my flashlight, I saw that it wasn't a storage room, but a small empty room with bare concrete walls. In the center was an old school desk, one of those wooden ones with the attached table covered in dust, and sitting at it, with her back to me, was a girl. She wore a faded blue school uniform, and her long, disheveled black hair fell over her back. I was paralyzed, unable to move or speak. My mind screamed that this couldn't be real, that it was just a hallucination caused by extreme fatigue. But then, slowly, the girl began to turn her head in my direction. That's when my flashlight flickered once, twice, and the third time the light returned, the room was empty. The desk was still there, but there was no sign of the girl. The only indication that something had been there were small footprints of wet soil on the concrete floor, leading to the opposite wall and simply disappearing. I left that room stumbling over my own feet, my heart beating so hard it felt like it would break my ribs. I ran down hallway 7B without looking back, convinced that something was following me. When I finally reached the main area of the factory, I found Hector, one of the night guards, making his rounds. He looked at me scared, probably because I was as pale as a ghost and sweating cold. "Are you okay, dude? You look like you've seen a fucking ghost," he said, not knowing how right he was. I wanted to tell him what had happened, but the words got stuck in my throat. Instead, I asked something that had been bothering me since I entered that hallway. "Hector, what was here before they built the factory?" He hesitated, looking around as if checking if we were alone, and then answered in a low voice. "A rural elementary school, small. They demolished it about 25 years ago to build this place. Why?" I made up some excuse and returned to my post, but I couldn't work well for the rest of the night. The image of that girl sitting at the school desk wouldn't leave my head. The next day, instead of going home after my shift, I went straight to the computer. My wife was still asleep, so I took the opportunity to investigate the history of that place. I typed Derramadero Rural School into Google and began reviewing the results. Most were irrelevant, but after going through several pages, I found a blog about local history that mentioned the old Santa Clara Rural School, demolished to make way for the industrial complex. I kept digging deeper and ended up in a digital archive of a local newspaper. That's when I found a small note from 1989, almost hidden among other news. Student from Santa Clara Rural School still missing. The digitized black and white photo showed a girl of about 9 years old, with long black hair and a shy smile, wearing a school uniform that appeared to be blue. Her name was Lucia Mendoza. According to the report, she had disappeared after staying at school for a remedial class. The searches lasted weeks, but they never found her. The school closed the following year due to falling enrollment, and the land remained abandoned until it was purchased by Autolux in 1995. That night, I returned to work with a knot in my stomach. I didn't tell anyone about my discoveries or what I had seen, fearing being ridiculed or worse, losing the job we so desperately needed. But I couldn't stop thinking about Lucia Mendoza and what might have happened to her. During the break, I sought out Ernesto again. He was alone in the break room, absent-mindedly playing with his cell phone. "I need to ask you something," I said, sitting across from him. "It's about the girl my brother saw. It's the same one you mentioned before, right? The one in the blue uniform." Ernesto looked from side to side, visibly uncomfortable, and then shrugged with an indifference that surprised me. "Look, man, everyone sees her sooner or later. Your brother just couldn't handle the pressure." He took a sip of coffee and continued, as if he were talking about the weather. "You just have to avoid hallway 7B after midnight and not stay alone in the stamping sector. You get used to it after a while. I've been here 5 years and I've only seen her twice." I was shocked by his casual attitude. "But aren't you afraid? Don't you want to know what happened?" Ernesto looked at me as if I were naive. "What happened? Everyone knows. They found her bones when they were building this place. The company covered up the case, and now she appears from time to time. It's just one more weird thing about this place, like the third-floor bathroom that always clogs or the cargo elevator that stops between floors. You get used to it." His indifference left me speechless. How could someone get used to something like that? Ernesto must have noticed my expression, because he added in a lower tone, "Look, it's not that we don't care. It's that there's nothing to do, you understand? The factory isn't going to close because of an apparition, and we need the job, so we do what's necessary. We respect her spaces and move on." He finished his coffee, crushed the cup, and threw it in the trash. "Your brother made his decision. You'll make yours, but if you decide to stay, learn to live with this, like all of us." And with that, he got up and went back to work, leaving me there with my thoughts. In the weeks that followed, I avoided hallway 7B as if it were a radioactive zone. I made huge detours just to avoid passing near that area. Still, sometimes during my early morning shifts, I felt that presence, a sudden cold, the distant sound of small footsteps or a child's laugh that seemed to come from nowhere. I never saw her directly again, but I knew she was there, watching. My son was born in the midst of all this, a healthy boy who brought some joy to those dark days. Alejandro reappeared for the baptism, but refused to talk about the factory, or why he had left so abruptly. I noticed that he even avoided looking in the direction of the industrial complex when we were in the city. I continued working there for 2 more years, long enough to save money and get a better job in another city. I never told my wife about Lucia. Why worry her with something she couldn't understand? I never thought I'd be here sharing something like this, but after keeping this story to myself for 3 years, I need to unburden myself with someone who might understand. My name is Daniela. I'm 22 years old now, and I was a first-year medical student at the Autonomous University of Coahuila when it all happened. I'm from Monterrey, but I moved to Saltillo to study, since the faculty there has an incredible research program. It was October 2020. We were still gradually returning to in-person classes after the pandemic, and I was desperate to secure a position in Dr. Vega's laboratory, which would practically guarantee my residency in the future. I lived in a tiny apartment near campus, one of those that only has space for a bed and a desk, and my life consisted of studying late and drinking too much coffee. That Friday, I was completely exhausted. I had slept maybe 3 hours because I stayed up finishing an anatomy report, and I still had to endure 2 consecutive biochemistry classes. At lunchtime, I was sitting with my usual group in the cafeteria. We were like the Foreigners Club. You know? Me from Monterrey, Miguel from Torreon, Ana Sofia from Chihuahua, and the Ramirez twins from Mexico City. We were complaining about exams when Lorena appeared. She was the only Saltillo native in our group, an anthropology student with those dark eyes that always seemed to know more than she said. Lorena had this strange way about her, you know? She wore these ancient necklaces that belonged to her great-grandmother, and had a habit of twisting a silver ring on her finger when she got nervous. That day, she arrived all mysterious and asked if we had heard about the consultation. When she started explaining about this ancient Saltillo ritual, there was this uncomfortable silence, you know? Miguel let out that laugh of someone who doesn't believe in anything, and the twins started making fun. But the way Lorena talked, it was different. It wasn't like when someone tells just any urban legend. She spoke like someone sharing a family secret, softly, looking around as if afraid someone might hear. According to her, the consultation was a ritual that dated back to the founding of the city, when the Spanish mixed with the native peoples. Some old Saltillo families still practiced it in secret, including hers. The ritual supposedly allowed you to see parts of the future through marks that appeared on the skin after burning questions written on paper. Lorena said her grandmother had done the ritual before marrying her grandfather and saw that she would have only male children, which ended up happening. I swear I wasn't going to participate in this craziness. I had a million things to study, and honestly I thought it was just another of Lorena's crazy stories. But that night, alone in my tiny apartment, I couldn't concentrate. I kept thinking about the internship vacancy, the exams, the pressure from my parents who sacrificed everything to send me to medical school. And then that message from Ana Sofia arrived. Are we going to that thing of Lorena's? I'm curious, but I don't want to go alone. I responded yes even before thinking it through. It was just a distraction, right? Something to tell later and laugh about. Little did I know that decision would change my life forever, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this. You'll understand. We met at Las Maravillas Park at 11:30 at night. Do you know Saltillo? It's a city in northern Mexico. It gets freezing, cold in winter. That night was no different, and I was shivering inside my jacket while waiting at the main entrance. During the day, the park is full of families, children running around, cotton candy vendors. But at night, it seemed like a different place. The ancient trees cast shadows that seemed to move on their own, and the wind made a strange noise as it passed through the dry leaves. There were a few yellowish lamps that barely illuminated the paths, and the sky was moonless, completely black. When everyone arrived, even Miguel, who swore he didn't believe in these nonsense, Lorena guided us down a side path that I didn't even know existed. We walked about 10 minutes until we reached a small clearing among enormous trees. I swear I had never seen this place before, despite having been to the park several times. It was as if it were hidden from the rest of the world. On the ground, there was a circle of small stones that could barely be seen in the darkness. Lorena explained that it was a PowerPoint marked for generations. She took out of her bag a super old cloth bag with strange embroidery, 5 candles of different colors, white, red, black, blue, and green. Each represented an aspect of the future: health, love, death, knowledge, and prosperity. She also took out some small pieces of paper, a black pen that looked like it was 100 years old, and a ceramic container with symbols I had never seen before. While she prepared everything, Eduardo, one of the twins, kept making jokes. But you could tell that even he was somewhat nervous. When Lorena lit the candles, I swear the air changed. It became heavier, colder, as if the temperature had suddenly dropped. She began to murmur words in an ancient Spanish that I could barely understand, and the candlelight didn't move despite the wind. It was as if time had stopped in that circle. Lorena gave us the papers and told us to write a question about our future. I spent a while looking at the blank paper. What did I really want to know? I ended up writing, "Will I get the medical residency I want?" It was what worried me most at that moment. We all put our papers in the ceramic container, and Lorena poured a liquid over them. She said it was rainwater collected during the equinox. When she lit the papers, the flame wasn't normal. It was bluish, almost violet, and made no sound as it burned. The smell was also strange, half sweet and metallic at the same time, like blood mixed with honey. Lorena told us to extend our hand over the smoke and then observe our palm. I chose the blue candle, knowledge, and passed my right hand over the smoke. At first I felt nothing, just a slight warmth, but then it began to tingle like when your foot falls asleep and circulation starts to return. I looked at my palm and almost screamed. Red lines were appearing, as if someone were drawing from inside my skin. It wasn't a burn, it was something different. The lines formed words, "Beware of the fire that purifies and marks." I showed it to Anna Sophia, who seemed as frightened as I was. Hers said something about distant waters. She ended up moving to Spain 6 months later, crossing the ocean. Eduardo insisted it was some trick, some chemical substance in the liquid that Lorena used. But how to explain that each of us received a completely different message, and how to explain what happened next? Sunday, 2 days after the ritual, I was alone in the chemistry lab. Everyone had gone out to eat, but I wanted to finish some tests to impress Dr. Vega. The words on my palm had already disappeared, leaving only a slight redness, and I was trying to convince myself that it had been just suggestion, as Eduardo said. I was working with an experimental solution in a petri dish when I noticed it started bubbling strangely. I leaned in to get a better look, not realizing that the Bunsen burner nearby was lit. I don't know exactly what happened next. I remember a flash of intense light, an absurd heat, a sharp pain in my right arm and face. I remember screaming, the fire alarm going off, and then nothing. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital. My parents were there, with those faces of people who haven't slept in days. My right arm and part of my face were covered in bandages. The doctors said I was lucky. The explosion could have killed me if I had been a few centimeters closer. I would have permanent scars, but no damage to my eyes or loss of mobility. It wasn't a coincidence, it couldn't be. It was impossible. Anna Sophia came to visit me and almost fainted when she saw the scars. When I was discharged, the first thing I did was look for Lorena. I found her in the university library. She looked at my scars for a long time and then said something I'll never forget. My grandmother once told me that the consultation doesn't predict the future. It marks it. The answers aren't predictions, they're designations. According to Lorena, the ritual and the explosion were part of the same web, the same destiny. Time wasn't a straight line, but a tapestry where everything was connected. I asked about the others, and she said some answers had already manifested, others would still come. The time of the ritual is not our time, she said. The strangest thing of all? Dr. Vega visited me in the hospital and offered me not only the internship vacancy, but a special position in his research project on tissue regeneration and burn treatment. Your personal experience will bring a unique perspective, he said. So in a way I got the residency I wanted, but through a path I could never have imagined. Today I carry these scars as a constant reminder that there are things in this world that the science I study cannot explain. I changed my specialization to emergency medicine with a focus on burn treatment. The marks on my arm aren't just scars from an accident, they're signs of a future that somehow was already written on my skin long before the explosion. Sometimes, on nights of the new moon, I look out the window toward Las Maravillas Park and wonder how many other people are there right now, asking questions whose answers are already determined, sealing their fates without knowing it. I never participated in the consultation again, but I also haven't told this story to anyone other than you. Some of my faculty colleagues think I'm lucky to have survived the accident and secured the position with Dr. Vega. But I know the truth. It wasn't luck. It was something much older and more powerful, something woven into the secret history of Saltillo, something that is now permanently marked on my skin and in my life.